This is the second video on chapter 4, and we ended the last one where we said that the yellow triangle is the consumer surplus to consumers. If competitive firms sell at PC and they sell quantity QC, while the firms receive the blue triangle amount of money. Now we want to compare the sum of yellow and blue to what will happen in the case that we have a monopoly. So if we go to the monopoly situation, the consumer surplus at the blue dot is given by the green triangle. Now the price is PM in the market, and so the price is higher, and that means the surplus is smaller. The higher the price, the smaller the surplus. The monopoly sells QM at PM, so they receive price times quantity, that's their total revenue, which is the blue rectangle. Now if you remember where the yellow rectangle and the previous blue one was, then you can see an area to the right of blue which is now open. So what are those two areas? The pink rectangle might go to other producers, so because the only QM is now produced, so fewer laborers and capital are needed to produce QM. So it could be that factors of production are set free to produce other things, but that will not necessarily happen. That may happen in the best case scenario. But the red triangle is lost to everybody, and that we call that the deadweight loss. No one gets that. So that's the point, that the loss to society, if we have monopolies, is at least as large as the red triangle. That's the deadweight loss, and probably some of the pink value that was received by the competitive firms is now lost to society as well, if those factors of production are not re-employed to produce something else. So you have this same graph in the textbook. I just wanted to make it a bit simpler to show you the graphs that we did in the first and second year, but figure 4.1 in your textbook tells the same story as we had here. So that was the deadweight loss, the red triangle, and the yellow rectangle in this graph is the amount that might be transferred to other sectors, and that's where it's, so just above figure 4.1 in the textbook is a paragraph which you should read carefully, and it says that triangle is transferred to other sectors in the economy, but this is evidently easier said than done. It's not necessarily going to happen. Then in the textbook you have another graph, figure 4.2. I am skipping this because it's just more of the same. The story of this whole chapter is that monopolies very often need to be regulated by the government. And I think if we can use figure 4.1 to make that argument, and this is just another angle on the whole argument, so you can skip 4.2. Next year when Mr. Scholes is back, then you will probably have to learn about figure 4.2 again. So let's add the average cost curve. So you should notice that until now we could find the maximum point of production, maximum profit point of production of both the monopoly and the competitive firms without having to know anything about the average cost curve, because firms maximize profits where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. So the average cost curve could look like that. What is important for you to remember is that the marginal cost curve cuts the average cost at its minimum point. The star means You have to find out why that is so. So the marginal cost runs through the minimum point of average cost. So now we can calculate the size of the profit. Until now, we just know that they are maximizing profit. But maximizing profit could also mean making a loss, but minimizing the loss. Maximizing profit or minimizing the loss is the same thing. It's just the best situation that they could be in given the cost curves. But if we want to calculate the size of the profit, then we need the average cost and average revenue curves. So to produce QM for the monopoly would cost ACM. Where's ACM? ACM, that would cost ACM to produce QM. And then, but the monopoly receives PM, so you can see that the monopoly is making a profit. The profit equal to the yellow rectangle. So it sells QM. It costs, if you go vertical from QM up to the average cost curve, you see what is the average cost per unit of QM. It's ACM. You just go horizontally to the price axis. We have the price that they receive, so the difference is the profits. So can you see that we use the average revenue curve, which is the demand curve, to find what they receive, revenue, and then we use the average cost curve to see what it costs, and the difference is the profit. So just to reiterate, to determine the output of the monopoly, so where do you find QM? You set marginal revenue equal to marginal cost. How do you find PM? You find it from the demand curve, so you go vertically up from QM to the demand curve to find PM. And then how do you find ACM? You go vertically up from QM to the purple AC curve, average cost curve, and then you have ACM. The difference between the two is PM minus ACM, and you multiply that by QM to determine the profits of the monopoly. Now, can you look at this graph and answer the question whether the competitive firm is making a profit or not? Does the competitive firm make a profit? Yes or no? Well, the competitive firm sells where marginal cost or the supply curve is equal to the demand curve. So we called it QC earlier, and you can see that the demand curve or the average revenue is still above average cost. As long as average revenue is above average cost, then the firm will make a profit. So at that point, the firm is making a small profit. Competitive firms are also making profits. So now we get to the concept of a natural monopoly. A natural monopoly. If you look at this graph, you should now see that the monopoly is still making a profit. So the monopoly is at QM. The average revenue is above average cost, but the competitive firm would make a loss in this case because the average cost curve is above average revenue. So the monopoly still makes a profit when marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, but the competitive firms will make a loss because at QC, where they maximize profits, they are actually not making a profit, they're minimizing losses, because to produce QC the cost is higher than the revenue. So they maximize or minimize loss at the red dot, and at the red dot they make a loss because average revenue on the demand curve is below the average cost. So the blue rectangle in this graph means they are making losses. So now we go back to looking at the same graph in the textbook, but I will pause the video here and continue in another one to conclude the chapter.